There is something profoundly quiet about the hospital, something that seems to go against the incessant flow of voices, hurried footsteps, and the clanking of machines. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint aroma of coffee coming from the break room is almost inoffensive. But despite this frenetic routine, there is a space of calm, a small pause in time, the glass door that separates the hospital from the outside world. In that place, a dog waits. He is not like any other lost animal, but rather as if he had a mission. His eyes are fixed on the door, a silent vigilance that transcends simple curiosity. He has something important there, something that no one else seems to understand. He does not bark, does not move, he just watches. On the outside, he seems to be just another stray dog, but his eyes tell a different story. He has been there for days. Sometimes he lies down, tired, but always with his head held high, attentive to the world around him. People who pass by him try to look away, perhaps thinking he is lost, perhaps ignoring him because they think he does not belong here. But he remains, as if he knows that his waiting has a purpose. He does not leave. He is there, waiting. The wind caresses his fur, but he does not seem to care. Time passes, but for him everything seems suspended, as if time itself were waiting. And then the door opens, not in a grand or dramatic way. It's a simple routine hospital movement. But for the dog, that movement is a signal. Something changes in his eyes. He stands up slowly as if preparing for something very big. He watches once more, and his expression is one of patience that few would understand. He's waiting for something, or rather for someone. In a hospital room, a 7-year-old child struggles silently with pain. Her body, so small and fragile, writhes on the bed, while the machine next to her marks each breath with impersonal precision. Her mother, her eyes swollen from crying so much, tries to stay strong, but the shadows under her eyes betray sleepless nights and days of a hope that is slowly beginning to fade. The little girl, named Susan, was brought to the hospital after a terrible accident. A simple game on a sunny day turned into a tragedy, and since then the lives of everyone around her have been interrupted. Susan lost much more than her physical vitality. She lost the energy, the light, the joy that always brought her family together. Now she lies there silently in a world that seems to have stopped, waiting for something that no one knows what it is. Her mother, Hello, sits by her side every day, holding her hand with silent strength. But the truth is that she feels like she is losing her daughter piece by piece. Every day, doctors try more treatments, more tests, more solutions, but the feeling that settles in Hello's heart is that perhaps, no matter how hard she fights, there is nothing more that can be done. A part of her soul has already been lost to the pain of seeing her daughter like that, while time slips through her fingers like fine sand. And yet, she refuses to give up. She looks at Susan with a hope as faint as the light of the end of the afternoon, and her mind is lost in thoughts of what it would be like to live without her. And it is at the height of this silent solitude, in the midst of the desperate struggle to stay strong, that something unexpected happens. The next morning, the sun was barely beginning to filter its rays through the hospital window, when Hello, as usual, walked into the hallway, the weight of exhaustion in her steps. She was preparing for a new day of waiting, but something at that moment caught her attention. On the other side of the glass door, the dog was there again. This time he was closer, but still watching with the same intensity. Hello hesitated for a moment, surprised by the presence of the animal. He seemed to be the same one she had seen days ago. The dog, a dark-coated mongrel with piercing yellow eyes, was standing still, as if he knew there was something important there. The dog looked at her for a second, and something in his gaze made Hello feel a chill. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, as if the animal was waiting for something, as if he understood the pain she carried. Hello, confused, hesitated. She had never paid much attention to street dogs, but there in that moment she felt a silent connection, as if the animal in its stillness was a metaphor for everything she was experiencing. The tireless waiting, the desire for something that she didn't know if it would come, and the sadness that hung over her like a shadow. The dog didn't come closer. He didn't ask for anything. He just watched. And as strange as it was, his presence brought her a sense of calm, as if he was there to remind her that she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, the dog kept appearing. He would always sit there in the same position facing the hospital door. Unhurried, undemanding. He became part of the routine, a silent spectator of this unfolding story. And interestingly, Susan seemed to start moving a little more. Not in a visible or dramatic way, but the simple fact that the girl was beginning to show signs of life in such a subtle way did not go unnoticed by Hello. It was as if the dog's presence had done something to the air, as if he had brought a new energy to the place, a silent but palpable energy. However, Hello didn't know yet. She didn't know that that dog would be the key to change. She didn't know that he was there not by chance, but for a greater purpose. Days passed, and the dog continued to appear without fail at the hospital door. He didn't seem to care about the heat or the cold or the hurried movement of the people around him. He remained like a silent, watchful, and constant figure. For Hello, his presence became increasingly comforting. The dog didn't demand anything from her. He was just there like a gentle and calm presence, a reminder that something could still change, that perhaps life wasn't just made up of despair and endless waiting. Susan, in turn, seemed to begin to react in an almost imperceptible way. Hello noticed that from time to time her fingers would move slightly, or her lips would move in small sighs, as if the girl were, in some way, responding to the energy that she could not explain. It wasn't enough for the doctors to believe that Susan was recovering, but for her mother it was everything. It was as if the dog's presence, with its silent waiting, was doing something inexplicable. Hello began to talk to Susan about the dog, telling her about the faithful figure who appeared at the door every day, waiting without rushing, as if he knew that time was not an enemy, but part of the process. Sometimes Hello thought about taking Susan to the window so she could see the dog, but she soon gave up. She didn't want to create false expectations. She didn't want to generate yet another hope that might be in vain. And even though Susan's behavior was shy and almost imperceptible, she began to make small gestures. Her eyes would open a little wider. Her breathing would become less heavy, as if she were somehow struggling to escape the silence in which she was immersed. It was a subtle change, but something that touched Hello's heart deeply. She knew something was changing, but she wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the dog. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was a combination of both. On one of the grayest days, Hello noticed something strange. When she went to the hallway to get a cup of coffee, the dog was not there. She looked around, wondering at his absence, and felt a slight anguish take over her. The dog was always there, like a fixed point. Without him, the hospital seemed emptier, as if a part of the routine had disappeared. And in that moment of doubt and loneliness, Susan did something that no one expected. She took a deep breath and almost imperceptibly moved her fingers. A shy gesture, but real. Hello, with tears in her eyes, ran to the room, feeling her heart racing. Susan was awake. Not completely, but it was a start. It was as if the dog had given her the strength she needed to finally fight. Maybe it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe the dog was more present than they imagined. Time seemed to drag on and at the same time fly by at a speed that Hello could barely keep up with. Each minute seemed like an eternity, and at the same time, each small progress Susan made was like a miracle. Hello spent her days observing her daughter, trying to detect every movement, every sigh, as if her own life were intertwined with these imperceptible signs of recovery. But what touched her most, what made her question the inexplicable the most, was the constant presence of the dog. He never disappeared. Sometimes when Hello approached the window, the dog was there, his gaze fixed with the same intensity as before, as if he were waiting for something that had not yet happened. That particular morning, Hello woke up earlier than usual. The news of Susan's recovery had not yet spread through the hospital, and she didn't know what to expect. When he entered Susan's room, his heart skipped a beat. The girl had her eyes partially open, her lips moving slightly as if she wanted to say something. It was the first time in days, maybe even weeks, that Hello had seen Susan outside of the deep stupor she was in. She approached, barely able to breathe. Her eyes were watery, but she knew she couldn't give in. She had to be strong. She whispered softly to Susan, asking her to react, to look at her. Susan, with visible effort, slowly turned her head and her eyes fixed on Hello's. It was a moment of deep connection, and Hello couldn't control the tears that began to flow. And then, a soft, almost imperceptible sound was heard. The bedroom door, which was ajar, shook slightly. When Hello turned around, she saw the dog standing at the door with his eyes fixed on Susan. He was there again. He didn't come any closer, but his presence was stronger than ever. Hello felt as if time had stopped. The dog seemed to be waiting for a reaction, as if he knew his wait was over. He was no longer just observing the room, he was witnessing a transformation. Susan, with great effort, raised her hand and slowly pointed to the dog. It was a small gesture, but it was full of meaning. Hello looked at Susan, then at the dog, and then she understood. The dog had been there all along, not just as a spectator, but as a silent key to her daughter's recovery. He wasn't just waiting for Susan to be cured. He was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the girl to recognize him. The connection between the two seemed almost mystical. Hello felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. And although she couldn't explain what was happening, she couldn't deny what she saw. The dog had given Susan the strength she needed to wake up, to fight, and perhaps in some way he had been the catalyst for this change. At that moment, Hello knelt down beside Susan's bed, took her hand and whispered, "You are no longer alone, my dear, you never were." And as she said this, she looked at the dog, who was still at the door, waiting, as if he had fulfilled his role. The next few days were like a dream come true. Susan slowly began to awaken to the world around her, her strength returning like a gentle tide. It was a gradual recovery, but with each small step forward, her mother felt a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Most surprising of all, however, was not Susan's physical awakening, but the profound change that was taking place within them, as both mother and daughter. Hello spent hours at Susan's bedside, touching her hand gently, as if she feared that by being too strong she might break something fragile and precious. She talked to Susan about the world outside, about the dog that waited for her every day at the hospital door, about the simple things that for so long she had taken for granted. And slowly Susan began to react, not only with her eyes but with a soft, almost imperceptible smile that made Hello's heart race. Hello could never explain the connection between the dog and her daughter, but she knew without a doubt that there was something profoundly transformative about everything that happened. The dog, with his infinite patience, waited not only for Susan's body but for her soul, as if he knew that true healing would only come when she was ready to return to the world, not only physically, but emotionally. And on a soft, sunny day, Susan finally sat up in bed. Her eyes were more alive than ever, and her smile, although still shy, radiated a light that filled the entire room. The dog, as always, was there at the door, watching her from afar. He didn't come closer, as if he knew that her moment had come. Hello, deeply touched, looked at the dog, and something warmed her heart. It was as if at that moment she understood that the dog did not need words, grand gestures. He was not there to be the solution. He was there to be the silence that accompanies the pain, the comfort that appears without being called. He was, in a way, the personification of the hope that was still there, no matter how desperate the situation was. Finally, the dog, silently and dignifiedly, began to walk away from the door. He had already fulfilled his role. When Hilo stood up to follow his steps, he turned, looking one last time at Susan. Then, without further ado, he walked away from the hospital. There was no dramatic farewell, just a silent goodbye, as if the dog knew that the child was now ready to go on her way. The hospital looked different. The mood in the air, the energy in the hall, everything felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted. Susan, still with a shy smile, looked at her mother as if she wanted to say something. Hello smiled, her eyes watering, and spoke with almost inaudible tenderness. You are stronger than you think, my daughter, and you are not alone. Not ever again. Meanwhile, the dog continued on his journey without turning back, but with the lightness of someone who knew he had accomplished his mission. He needed no recognition. His loyalty was unconditional, and his presence was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, there is always something waiting for us. Something that, with patience, can help us find our way back to life. And so the story of the dog and the child would become a legend among those who passed through the hospital. A tale passed down in whispers from generation to generation about how sometimes hope comes in unexpected forms. Quiet, loyal, and touchingly simple. If this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more are still to come. Here, every bark carries a new beginning, a second chance, a brand new life. If you believe in the power of dogs to change destinies, like mine, like yours, then subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because together we'll share stories the world needs to hear and feel.